So I took a piece of tread riser and bored a hole through it that'll fit the output shaft. And then there's two holes here that I can use to help secure the transmission onto the board, and it makes it easier to work on that way. There we go. And what I use is a couple of M8 bolts to just hold the back of the transmission in. Before I work on the transmission, I tried to clean it up as best I could, because it was pretty much completely coated in dirt and oil and grit. And I never like to work on anything that's filthy, so I've got it clean enough to start work on it. So I'm going to start by removing the neutral switch. Put a bunch of sealant on the end. As you can see right here, it's all coated. These outer cases are fairly thin, and if you over tighten them, you'll crack the seal between the case and the phenolic. So it's not uncommon to try to put a sealer on there when you install the new switch. So I'm going to remove the shift linkage. Yeah, that's usually pretty easy. Just get the Allen to come loose and back it out. And then the whole linkage will slide right out. And I have drained the tranny, but there's still a little residual oil in there. Not uncommon. This is the CycleWorks tool for removing the transmission output flange. The flange is held with a nut, and it's on a tapered shaft. And that nut's up around 160 foot-pounds, so it's really on there. So this plate goes on the top and lines up with the flange on the 4 holes, and then this handle goes on top so that you can keep the output shaft from turning while you're backing the bolt out. So they all go in like that, and then the socket goes in, and I use a breaker bar and an old fork tube to hold everything, and then push as hard as I can to get it to snap the nut free. Now I'm using some old fork tubes so I can get some real leverage, and I'm actually going to put my feet on the bottom one to hold it, and then pull the top one toward me and try to break the nut. There it comes. Break the nut loose. Okay. So there's the nut. There's also a pretty stout wave washer down in there that helps secure that nut. Now the puller assembly is a sort of a threaded helix like that, and I put some grease on it and a puller bolt, and that slides. I back the puller bolt up and then run this down until it's flush. And then I run the puller bolt down, and then I use a large socket, and the same trick with the multiple fork tubes to pop that free. Oh, I'm just going to brace my feet, and then I can get some leverage, and it's starting to move. Okay, there we go. Sometimes that is really, really hard to get to come loose. But this one was not all that hard. So I'll just pull it all the way up off the flange. There it is. There you go. So that's the output shaft, which has got a taper on it. And this was the flange that I pulled that fits on like that. And those were the wave washer and the locking nut that hold it on. Next thing I'm going to remove is the speedometer drive gear. So I'm just going to back off the special bolt here. This has a hole in the middle because it acts as a breathing bolt to relieve pressure in the transmission and the shaft drive. And then there's a bushing that pulls out. And if you reach inside, you can just slide with your finger the gearing here, which is what spins the speedometer shaft off the output of the transmission. So this is the output shaft seal, which will be replaced. And the next thing is to remove all the cover bolts, heat the cover, and get it to come up and off the 3 shafts that are inside the transmission. So I'm going to heat up the cover now that I have the bolts out. And there's a shaft here, a shaft here, and a shaft here. So I'm going to heat this area so that it will expand the cover and it will let it slide up and off the shaft bearings. What I usually do is use a couple of MAP gas torches and just sort of heat around the area here until it gets sizzle hot, and then generally I can just pull the cover right up and off. Okay, let's see if we can get it to move here. Yeah, it's coming. There it is. Now I want to pick it straight up because there's going to be some shims that I don't want to drop. And the cover's kind of hot, so I'm going to put it someplace to cool so it won't get me in trouble. So these are the 3 shafts in the transmission. This is the output shaft, the intermediate shaft, and the input shaft. And on top of the bearings are a set of thin shims that are used to get the proper end play on each shaft. So I'm going to remove these and put them in a bag so I know which shims came off which shaft. Now on the intermediate shaft, there's a shim and a cover plate, and those I'm going to keep together and put in the bag that I have labeled so I can keep all the shims with the correct shaft. Now I can just pull the input shaft straight up and out. This is the inner bearing race and the helical cut gear. This is the torsional damper for shock loads, and then the top ball bearing. Now to remove the other 2 shafts, I'm first going to remove the shift forks and shift cam assembly. The cam assembly is secured by these 2 bolts on the face of the transmission, so I'll just remove those. Now before I remove them, they're actually very tight and almost a shrink fit into the hole in the case, so I'm just going to heat it up a little bit and then it'll make it easy to get the bolts out. So This is one of the bolts. You can see it has a very long shoulder, which is a tight fit in the case. That's why I wanted to heat it up. And now I can just grab the whole assembly and pull it back this way, and it'll come off the pins on the shift forks, and I can pull it up and out. So this is the shift cam assembly. Now these shafts hold the shift forks. One of them is on the intermediate shaft, and this shaft holds two of them, a lower one and an upper one that go on the output shaft. Now this shaft you can generally just pull straight up and out, and you'll get the shift forks as a unit right out with the shaft. So that's pretty easy. Now this shaft doesn't come out, but I'll get that fork out when I remove the two shafts here, the intermediate and the output shaft. And I'll do that by heating up the back of the case, so the bearings that they're in will be able to slide out of the bore in the case. So I've got a couple of 2x4s laid across my parts washer, and I'll put the transmission this way. And then if I heat up the pockets here for the bearings on the input and intermediate shaft, generally gravity will just let the whole assembly drop right out. So everything came out of the case. I had to rock it just a little bit to get things to fall out, but the shift fork that fits on this shaft that you don't remove, that one kind of sometimes holds things up a little. Now the intermediate shaft came out, and there's another baffle plate on the other bearing, like on the top. So that falls right out because the bearing fits into this hole, and of course as the aluminum expands, then it can just fall right out. Then the output shaft came on out nice and easy. Same idea. The bearing is captive, and then you just heat up the aluminum and it expands. Now the other thing that came out is the inner race of the input shaft, which is going to fit here in this bore. That popped right out too. So heating everything up just works nicely with gravity assisting you to drop all the parts out of the case. Thought I'd show a little of that detail on the input shaft, but this is the roller bearing outer race, and then this is the inner race on the shaft. So it just drops right in, which was why it was easy to slide it in and out without any difficulty. So to remove the output shaft seal, I carefully put a large blade screwdriver on the edge of the seal and whacked it around the perimeter, and that knocked the seal out. It's beat up probably from when I heated the cover, but I got it out. So to remove the input shaft seal, I'm going to do the same thing, just put a large blade screwdriver on the seal and give a couple of good whacks, and it should slide right out. Now I supported the front case on some 2x4s. Now the shift lever shaft seal needs to come out too, and I'm going to use a hook seal puller very carefully so I don't scratch the edge. Just catch it under the lip of the seal, and a little bit of pull, and the seal pops right out.